Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you to the Department of Education Victoria for helping us bring this conversation together. It's really important to support our community, and we really would love to start off today by talking about how we can better support autistic girls and teens and neurodivergent families under this pandemic. And I think we can all agree, given the snap lockdown last week, it really does highlight the importance of today's conversation more than ever. So today's a really informal conversation. So if you're listening, grab a cuppa, sit back and relax. We've got some wonderful speakers here today and who have kindly agreed to chat to me. And we'll be covering a few topics, including the transition back to on-site learning, especially managing the ongoing uncertainty that we're experiencing, mental health and wellbeing. Obviously, we're going to take a closer look at that given the impact of the pandemic, and a little bit about autistic and neurodivergent families and parenting during this lockdown and uncertain times at school. So I'm Katie Koulas. I'm the CEO of Yellow Ladybugs. I have brought a few events to our community over the past and had some amazing speakers that you'll hear from today, and also a new speaker that I'd love to introduce in a moment. I'm really proud to have a full autistic-led panel for today's discussion. So that's something that we really do believe in Yellow Ladybugs. We value the authentic autistic-led and neurodivergent-led conversation. So really pleased to begin by introducing Penny Robinson, one of our ambassadors. Penny's a lecturer at Monash University, and many of you will be familiar with Penny. She also attends some of our social events and is an awesome role model for our members. We also share her with the ICANN Network and Asperger's Vic, so we're really proud to have Penny here today. And we've also got Shadia, another ambassador for Yellow Ladybugs and founder of Autism Actually. And Shadia is studying speech pathology and has been a really popular speaker at some of our previous events and forums across many issues, including mental health and wellbeing. So excited to speak to you again, Shadia. Welcome.
Thanks, Katie. It's such a joy to be here, particularly with some other familiar speakers. And like Penny, I think having the allied health perspective and seeing the effects of COVID on, providing services and things, even through placement as a student, has been a really interesting experience, coupled with my autistic experience. So I'm very excited to share that with you all today.
Thank you. Yeah, we're very lucky to have you all here. And speaking of lucky, we're also really pleased to welcome Amanda to our Yellow Ladybugs community. Amanda is a late identified autistic woman and mother to neurodivergent teens and an openly autistic psychologist. She's well known to the community through her Autistic Pride Mama blog, and I'm really excited to introduce her to you today. Welcome, Amanda.
Thank you, Katie. And hi, Penny and Shadia. Good to see you again. Hello. I feel very privileged to be amongst this, prestigious crowd of people. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, we're very grateful, and I can't wait to hear everyone's thoughts. And just in this relaxed, casual conversation, I think we'll get a lot from it. I'll make sure I also include the links so you can follow each of our speakers today at the end of the presentation, because they're really awesome to follow. And if you haven't followed them already, please make sure you do. So today, like I said, we're just going to sort of touch on, really to begin with as an intro, a bit about your lived experience and what you learnt about yourself maybe as an autistic individual living under the pandemic conditions, or maybe under this new COVID normal. I'd love to hear about yourself and what you've learnt. Penny, what do you want to add to that?
Well, I started working from home on the 12th of March last year. And we had planned to just work from home for one day. That was the day that the Melbourne Grand Prix was on at Albert Park Lake. And my office is on St Kilda Road, really, really close to the Grand Prix circuit. So ever since my workplace moved closer to the Grand Prix track at the end of 2017, Grand Prix days equals Penny work from home, no questions. So Wednesday, the 11th of March, I'd left work planning to work from home for one day. And then on Friday, the 13th, yes, the 13th of March, that was when the restrictions started being announced. So because I get to train to work and all of that stuff, I then didn't really feel comfortable returning to work. But of course, over the weekend, there wasn't very much direction. Luckily, one of my colleagues sent me a Facebook message a bit before 10 p.m. on Sunday night, asking me if I was still up and whether I was going to work. And she needed me to help tutor a subject online the next morning. So that gave me an out to work from home that day. And we're recording this on the 22nd of February. I have not been back at work since, other than to collect some stuff. So,
wow, that's a long time, Penny,
yeah.
and interesting. You were quite early in the piece to be able to access that flexibility in the workplace. That's a really good intro, Penny. Shadia, did you want to add to that and what maybe you've learned during this pandemic about yourself as a student, autistic individual or professional?
I guess for me, it really hit how much I'd been masking just generally in life. And then when you take away certain environments, suddenly I felt very much uncluttered. So for me, COVID was a bit of a mixed experience. It wasn't there were positive aspects and negative aspects, but none sort of outweighed the other. For me, I think it just made me really realize that I really can't put my eggs in too many baskets. I had to kind of do a reality check and go, okay, I have to cut down my work if I want to study. I have to cut down my study for self-care. So I actually went back to part-time, which I haven't done since high school. And since then, I've been much better. I think another thing that I learned about me, that there are so many contexts and transitioning that still affects me that I hadn't picked up on before. So even just going on public transport, then the sensory issues involved in that before going to university had taken its toll on me. And then once I was online in the comfort of my own home, it was so much different because I could freely stim, I could turn my camera off, I could go to get a drink of water or a snack. And I realized that there were many things that I actually quite enjoyed about the flexible learning environment. On the other hand, for certain practical aspects of my course, it did make things a bit challenging, particularly the placement. And so there was less sort of structure in my days. It all kind of blended in together. More things could be fit into the day, which is both good and bad for self-care. But it also gave me a big chance to really take time out for myself, reconnect to nature. And I've been able to really bond with my assistant dog in training and really take time to build that bond with her. And she's halfway through her training. So I wouldn't have been able to devote so much time to her had I been in the pre-COVID situation.
Thank you for that. And I think what your experience highlights is what many of our members sent to us when we surveyed them. And I'll put a link to our report on that. It's a mixed bag. There were so many benefits, and there were also some really challenging times. And I think you've perfectly shared that example there. Thanks, Shadia. Amanda, did you want to add any comments generally about maybe how this experience has helped you? I'll just unmute you.
I think similar to Shadia, that at the very beginning, when we were just having a short lockdown, we're having going to remote everything. I think it was a really big relief for me and my kids and a whole lot of people in the community that I was speaking to, the autistic community, just to suddenly not have to travel, not to have to do all those running around with, taking kids to school, taking them to activities, taking them to therapists, or all the things that we do as autistic families. There's usually, we all need our supports. And I think the fact that overnight it was like the world accommodated us, like things that we had wanted and needed forever, like, and kids had needed, you know, in schools where some kids really need to not go to school every day, but still want to access learning remotely, or they want to, you know, come dip in and out. And that was just like not an option. And suddenly it was like, it's an option. And it wasn't when we asked for it. It was like, it took a global pandemic, I think, to make all these things possible that are accommodations that really have been helpful, like telehealth. I mean, oh my gosh, how many times is it that you want to take your child, or you have to get to an appointment, but you're not there in time, and then you just have to pay and you don't get it. Whereas now you can just ring on the phone. You know, if you're feeling under the weather, you don't want to go, you can still do it. You know, your child can be, you know, in their own environment with their pets, with their whatever. And so I think all of that really illustrated how it is possible to accommodate neurodivergent people, and that a lot of the accommodations that maybe neurotypical or non-autistic people were struggling with, a lot of autistic people seem to be really happy with, which was the opportunity to stay at home and be in your own environment and communicate differently, not have to be speaking or going to that meeting, just doing it in different ways. So that's what I really noticed at the start. Yeah. That's what
That's a really good point. It's interesting that what you described about the access to telehealth, because we'll talk about neurodivergent parents towards the end of today, but I think that is one of the benefits of being able to juggle that with parents who have their own executive functioning issues, trying to juggle so many appointments. So that is a good one. We did have one of our members send in this point, and I just will read it here because it does speak to that. They said that the remote learning was incredibly stressful as a neurodivergent parent, because it placed the learning needs of 3 children squarely on their back, with no recognition that as a parent they were struggling with planning and executive functioning and set tasks. And it raised a lot of PTSD from being left adrift in schooling system as a child. And it felt like they were harming their children's education by their inability to deliver hours of learning. We heard that a lot, and that's why the last topic we will talk about, it's not just the children that we're focusing on. There's obviously adults, and Penny and Shadi are talking today, and yourself, Amanda. But it has to be a holistic, whole family approach, don't you think?
Am I able to just speak to that a little bit now, because I might forget later?
Go for it.
Which is my executive functioning, which is that I guess the benefits in the beginning was sort of like no expectations. There was no expectations to be really performing or schooling or doing anything. It was just like, okay, we're having a break. We're just going to have a break from all of that rush at life. And then I think there was all this pressure on teachers and educators like yourself, Penny, who were completely burnt out by having to suddenly adapt, you know, overnight with no support, just like, you know, create a curriculum. And so there wasn't any opportunity to make that diverse, like for our kids, for kids who are not going to be able to just do the same sort of stuff, but just remotely with no hands-on learning. So from my perspective as a mum and with really different kids, I was just really no expectations. Like, no, it was just really very child-led, and it was individual, and I didn't partake in any sort of you have to do this or you have to do that. And a lot of the community, I think the autistic community that I was sort of linked in with, were really struggling with that same thing. And kids that I saw, I guess as a psychologist, were really struggling because it didn't suit them, and they were just, their mental health was really deteriorating. And like my advice really was to just have very little expectations in terms of doing that assignment or this assignment, that will all, the whole world has kind of, had a break from access to regular support. So my main focus was on just really my kids and the kids that I consult to, I guess, finding ways to meet their own sensory needs, their own passions, to social needs, finding ways to kind of keep connected and do the things that are really going to help their own sensory system feel okay. And to me, it's always mental health and wellbeing above an assignment.
Definitely. And I think that will lead us in nicely to a couple of more questions that we'll have on mental health and wellbeing. But I guess I wonder, picking up from that, whether Shadia, Penny or Amanda, we can have a quick think about how we can actually use some of those learnings and apply this to start changing the culture within our schools, because we definitely see an explicit shift, like you said, that schools and organisations can be more flexible. It's taken a pandemic to show how flexible, but how can we use these learnings to help shift this? Now, it's a big question to tackle. Even if it's just one thought on it, at least we're starting that conversation today. Did anyone have any initial thoughts on that? Penny?
Just to mention that as a result of people doing their schooling from home during the various lockdowns, there certainly have been a reasonable number of parents post in the Yellow Ladybugs Victoria group over the last few months. As a result of their kid thriving in learning from home, they then went and investigated virtual school or home learning. So I think that there's been some people who typical school didn't work, but the parents weren't brave enough to make the jump. But having been forced to make the jump to home learning, remote learning due to the pandemic, the parent realised, actually, yeah, we can do this. So then investigated virtual school or homeschool.
Really good point, Penny. We definitely saw a shift in our members asking more information about access to different types of education, and that's really good to see. And also, I also think, though, that this is why the Department of Education Victoria are asking us to have this conversation, because we also want to make school an accessible place and this flexibility continue. So you've raised a really good point there. Shadia, did you have anything you wanted to add on that topic?
Yeah, absolutely. So I agree with Penny. I think particularly as a student, we've been able to adapt to online learning. Granted, it was, difficult at the start, but it's given us evidence that it can work and it can be adapted to suit various needs. And I've even spoken to neurotypical students who said that they are looking at a mixed approach of online and in person to really prioritize their own needs. And I think for my main fear is that after this pandemic, we'll go back to the normal, what is perceived to be the normal way of learning or delivering education, and those online or multimodal options are no longer available. So I think for me, it's been interesting speaking to my neurotypical connections and realizing that all of us are struggling in different ways. So for me, it was mainly the constant transitioning and having to process the events that happened across the year, because my mind works in pictures and experiences, and it's taken me a long time to process all the change that's happened very quickly. And then also finding that time for myself to get off the screen, get off the computer and find a sense of normal in my routine. But then again, a lot of my neurotypical friends have struggled with not being able to see their friends during the week, and that their routine was disrupted. And we've had conversations about it going, well, this is how it feels like for me on a daily basis, before COVID. So I think it's looking beyond just what's the majority way of learning or the majority way of living, but how can we develop an inclusive community and an inclusive way of learning that suits every need. And that might look like homeschooling, might look like part-time study, that might look like a bit of both. But I think it's time that we start to open our minds to different ways and realise that every student is different and it's not a one-size-fits-all.
Absolutely, well said. And I think today's conversation is part of that change. Amanda, did you want to add any comments to that one?
Yeah, look, absolutely, Shadia and Penny. And I think that we can't let this be the end of accommodating different learning styles, different working environments. I think that, yes, it is not for everybody. There is heaps of people who are really struggling with working and learning remotely, but there are so many people, and as Shadia said, people who are not diagnosed as neurodivergent, but who are finding so many advantages of being able to work remotely to their work-life balance, particularly when we're not in lockdown, when we're in sort of COVID normal and we can still do stuff, but we're still working remotely. But I do think for students and young people, particularly parents of really little kids, I think that it really created such a lot of demand and burnout on parents who were struggling to work, and there wasn't any childcare or school, and their kids had really high needs to begin with, and usually would have had, perhaps a support worker at school, but then they're at home trying to juggle all of that. And so there was just a lot of really burnt out parents. And, I think that's been a really big fallout.
Absolutely. And that sort of leads into what I was hoping to talk about in terms of mental health and wellbeing for our community. It's really important to look at how we can use this experience to better promote positive mental health and wellbeing outcomes for not autistic girls at school, autistic teachers in a tertiary setting, autistic teens, and how the post-traumatic stress of dealing with this in uncertain times, and how we can use it maybe a more trauma-informed approach. We hear a lot about trauma-informed approach, connection, empathy, but really making sure now more than ever that that's what we are doing, because there is so much stress that's going to unfold over this year. It will take people different time to process, as Shadia was saying. It's, the fallout and feeling of that might come now, it might come at the end of this year, it might come different time for everyone. So how do we make sure that health and wellbeing is a priority at school for our autistic girls and individuals?
I found telehealth psychologist appointments quite useful, but I think that's because I'm very familiar with using Zoom for work meetings. So that meant that I was able to make the transition to telehealth appointments for psych quite quickly, and I felt comfortable with it. But I know there's other members of the community who just cannot stand video. So there were some people who were really struggling during the various lockdowns, but because they detested video telehealth or phone telehealth so much, they stopped having appointments altogether and just waited for face-to-face to return. I can see Amanda nodding there. But I think it's also important to recognise when you're struggling and ask for help. So there were a few times when I had to communicate to my supervisor or my colleague I was teaching with that no, I wasn't okay. And I at the end of semester 2, I worked through sensory overload one day to release the marks for 2 assignments as we had promised, as we had scheduled. But then students then complained about feedback and other things, and I completely lost it. But basically what happened that week was I'd had 4 hours of Zoom teaching that I was running on the Wednesday. So by Friday, that had caught up with me, but I felt pressured to keep going to release the marks. Whereas the following week, I had a 3-hour Zoom meeting on the Friday morning. Note, I don't normally work Fridays. And I had so much stuff that had to be done before the exam was sorted. So I basically worked out, for me to be able to get everything done by Monday, I have to have a Friday afternoon nap so I can then keep on working throughout the weekend. So
That's a good point, Penny. I think,
it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think in terms of if we look at it through the lens for autistic girls at school or teens, making sure that we schedule in these times that they can have downtime and when they need it, and to be understanding of that more than now than ever, because it sounds like you went through quite a big sensory overwhelm with so many different elements, and that's exactly what would be happening for our students as well, and parents. So making sure that everyone's got their opportunity to have that time down, and maybe not making sure we understand and use deep empathy to support them through this time, or support ourselves through this time, rather than going to a fix-it mode of trying to get them out of the house, understanding why it's important for them to do it their way. Shadia, anything you wanted to talk about in terms of mental health? I know this is a big passion of yours.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a fine line between continuing academics, but also acknowledging the mental toll that all this transitioning has taken. And when you have to expend your energy in one way, just coping or processing lockdown, that is going to impact on other areas. So like I said, I couldn't study to the best of my ability like I could maybe before the lockdown even, because I was still processing all the change that was going on, and it happened so quickly that it didn't give me time to kind of catch up with all the stuff that was going through my head. And it often felt like I was waking up and treading through treacle or something, because it just felt so effortful just to wake up. And I think that's when I realized what autistic adults meant when they talked about burnout. And that's something that is a new experience for me, but I've experienced it a lot over lockdown. And I think it's really important that for all students, this toll is acknowledged, because it's not just autistic students that have been impacted, it's neurodivergent students that might have had strategies in place that have now had to be changed, or even neurotypical students who enjoyed group work or other scenarios that have not been able to have that outlet. So I think for me personally, I think it's really important that we focus on not only obviously academic support, like helping us with our neurology and working out strategies to study effectively, but other areas like organisation, connecting us with other autistic people and autistic adults. And I was lucky to have people like Penny when I was in high school to help navigate my own autistic identity. And it's because of people like her that I'm at the place I am today. And just providing those opportunities for connection, whether that's in an online format, whether that's in person. And I often joke to my friends that really my social life hasn't been that impacted that much, because most of my friends prefer communicating via text. And when people were struggling from, forced to socially retreat, that was time of respite for me, and it forced me to take time out for myself rather than push myself to do things all the time. I had to be.
Absolutely. Really well said. And I think the connection to peers, autistic or neurodivergent peers, is a really good point that you made there. And which is why we're so passionate about keeping our online programs going through COVID, because it can be a really lonely time when you're not accessing your peers face to face. I mean, with this threat of going back and forth, school, face to face, lockdown, there's still a lot of trauma there, I think, that we're all going to be unpacking for a while as parents, as students, as teachers. So definitely going to impact mental health. And I'd love to hear Amanda's thoughts on that entire topic.
We're all different. So it's not like neurodivergent people are all one cluster of, people all the same. It's like, it's not all LGBT people are all the same. We're all different, within that group. And I think that it's, in terms of like sort of trauma informed, like one of the major things is kind of being able to understand that our nervous system can be triggered into flight fight by things that are not even happening. They're not happening socially. Like, they're not things that are problems like communicating with you and me. It could be things like it might be past, but often it is our sensory system for neurodivergent people, that our different ways of our different sensory needs, because our bodies are just created differently, our nervous system is created differently. We may need to be actually up and moving and doing hands-on stuff to learn. And sitting in front of a computer might put us into like a threat response. Shadia, did you want to say something?
I just wanted to add to that, actually, because that's one of the biggest struggles that I have going on Zoom. Like, I'd be moving around and stuff, and I had to turn my camera off. But then my neurotypical peers wanted to see my face, and it was too overwhelming for me, too much visual stuff. And right now, my mum and I both have desk risers, so I'm actually standing up right now, and it just helps. It makes a huge difference, and it's really helped both of us over COVID, because sitting down just makes me want to wriggle and get all that energy out.
Yes. Well, I've learned about my own sensory Clay. I've learned that I need to sit on the floor. I need to be either walking around like Shadia or sitting on the floor. If I don't, my whole body will go into a threat response, and I don't even know. Like, cognitively, I don't feel stressed, but my body is accumulating adrenaline, and it's going to lead to, it'll lead to stress eventually. But that is just a sensory difference that I've got. So I'm on the floor. I'm sitting on the ground now. When I'm at work, I sit on the floor,
I think that's been a good lesson, and a great way for teachers to connect directly with students is by making that direct connection and asking them what's helping them at home. Direct connection is a really real, it needs to be real and authentic, and asking them about, if they've got animals at home or something. We had many members say that they felt more comfortable once their teachers reached out directly, individually and privately, to make that connection. Just to check in also.
Shadia, a very quick solution to you wanting your camera off, but your student colleagues wanting to see your face. I have my camera off more than most of my colleagues. I get around that because I have a profile picture embedded into Zoom. So that means when I have my camera off, I'm not a black box with my name in white text. You can still see my photo.
That's a great tip, Penny, and a great tip for anyone else. And then it means if you move out of the camera and you're fidgeting, it doesn't matter because no one can see you.
Yeah. I just did that before when I had to go and plug in my iPad, which was about to die.
So. And it's good to normalize, like, that's the point. We could, it's perfectly okay to get up and do whatever you need to do to get through. If you want privacy, that is such a good tip.
Also, as autistics, we're less likely to reach out for help. sometimes we need someone else to reach out to us first.
Absolutely. The importance of someone checking in is really strong.
I think it's also important from my own perspective, you know, when on my road to self-advocacy, my key teachers always connected in with either my primary support, which was my parents, or allied health support. And I think that there can be a lot gained from having more dialogue between different supports and also including the student. So for me, I was included in meetings about myself. I was able to sort of talk about my own sensory differences and what being autistic meant to me, and I felt more seen. And the teachers felt more comfortable talking to me too.
That's a good point. Can I just ask, with last week's snap lockdown, it was a really big reminder that we can return to lockdown and or remote learning at any time with little warning. And I think that issue generally would be hard for all students, all teachers, all professionals. But how do we cope with this sort of uncertainty going forward? How do we sort of put some systems in place to better support, you know, students at school with that reality this year? Any good ideas? Yeah, Amanda?
I think it's about just really being very honest about with everybody, no matter how old they are, about the situation being a unfolding, flexible situation, and that it is unknown, and just having those conversations just along the way, just so that there is like a plan. It's a bit like, you know, a fire plan in summer. You sort of have that plan, that lockdown plan that kids know about, parents know about, you know, so that it's not like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? Like, I think every time it happened, to be honest, I thought people in my circles, there was that rush of anxiety about, like, is this going to be, particularly Melbourne, we're all in Melbourne, aren't we? That we had the longest lockdown in the history of the world by the sound of it. But to me, it wasn't as bad as, you know, to me as an autistic person, it wasn't as bad as some people found it. But I think if people were, particularly, I think parents and employment, like, that's the thing which young people, as you said, Shadia, you've experienced that burnout of, you know, that I think happens as we get older. It can happen to younger people too, definitely. But that responsibility, that financial, you know, I guess the uncertainty of employment has created just another layer of mental health stress that's just going to be
for the
ongoing.
whole family. Exactly, for the whole family. And I guess when the family's stressed, it ripples down to everyone. Really,
that's safety. Like, that's your basic need. So you're not even thinking about, you know, learning.
Yeah.
This is the thing with trauma, I guess, is that often it's people who aren't aware of its impact, is that it's not like you can just put it aside and say, oh, well, that's not happening now. I'm okay. I'm safe. Let's see 3 things and touch 3 things. It's not like that when you are having a physiological response to threat that feels, well, your body is acting as if your life is in danger right then and there. And it's not something that just goes away in 5 minutes if it's a full-blown sort of that level of threat. So I think there's sort of a bit of understanding of it, because I think the whole world sort of had a bit of that. It's like, oh my gosh, this is actually like everybody's sort of feeling that uncertainty and stress and fear of lives being lost and, you know, safety. But for autistic and just a lot of people not autistic who have been through trauma, it's like cumulative. So we're already in, a lot of us, our threat system is acting as if we are in danger on a daily basis, not on an occasional basis. And then we add the pandemic, which is sort of like this generalized everyone in the world kind of, you know, that uncertainty and fear. So it's sort of layers and layers. So we've still got those, we're still like, we've got to
it's really good, Amanda. That is so on point. And there was something you mentioned that I want to draw out just as a possible solution. If you mentioned a lockdown plan, and I think it actually sounds really good because, you know, we have safety plans already for ourselves or our students. A lockdown plan is actually a good way, I think. It's actually a new idea that you've come up with, Amanda.
A new word.
A lockdown plan.
Let's do it.
So let's do it. So
let's do it, Yellow Ladybug.
Yes, let's have a lockdown plan.
Let's create a performer.
Yes, and it's customized to each person because what worked for me might not work for someone else. And so we can use what lessons we had over the last 12 months, and you can get input from the school, you can get input from the support team, and then it gives, I guess, from a student perspective, a sense of control. Okay, we're going into lockdown, but I know that the first day of lockdown, I get to watch TV all day, and I know I've got a built-in rest day to help with transition. So I think that's actually a really good idea. They're like Oprah, and I'll be like, aha moment, lockdown plan.
Yeah, I love it.
But I think that's actually not a bad idea. I really think that it would work for adults as well. And as a family unit to go, you know what, my partner might take 3 days off as soon as it gets announced he's not going to be working for 3 days to help our family unit transition into lockdown. I mean, it's not always an option, but I guess it's whatever works for each person and their family. So,
Shadia, I see Shadia.
I just wanted to expand on that because it just made me reflect on something that I've really struggled to put in words, but over COVID, I felt more isolated in terms of asking for help and initiating that help because my systems that I'd learned about reaching out for help were suddenly different. So, for example, booking an allied health session via telehealth, it might be on the phone, it might be on Zoom. And so I put it into the too hard basket. And the ICANN network actually shared Carol Gray's social story on COVID, and I read through it and I went, these sorts of things are really helpful. And I think that would be very helpful if autistic individuals have supports in place in person or pre-lockdown, to be able to form that plan with the allied health professionals. Yes. What if something happened? What if lockdown happens? What are the steps you can take? So then you don't do what I did and just shut down and go, I'm just going to block out the world for a bit because it's just too hard.
Yeah. I think we've learned that now. Like the first time, I don't think anyone, all the services knew what was going to happen. Like that was the thing. Like we didn't know how to access services, but the services didn't know how they were going to be able to provide a service. So it was a very difficult time when people needed services. And I think Yellow Ladybugs did a really good job, and Penny, with all your resources, yes, updating everybody. Because I think the community just created this sort of came together. It felt like very, very like the community was like a little community in a crisis, was helping each other. But now I think services do know there are COVID plans, there should be. So I think that now is a good time to be able to create something that is possible, probably, hopefully, possible, flexible. Our kids need to know these plans are flexible. That is so important, that we don't make promises that we can't keep, or we don't know. I think it's just, we can always sort of reassure our kids that we will be there to help them, support them, guide them through change, but we don't know everything that's going to happen. So today, this is what we plan. But there might if something changes, I will help you manage that.
Yeah.
You won't be on your own with it. And we still don't have, Penny, like the Medicare for psychology telehealth is going to run out any minute, and there's been no resolution at this stage. Please, government, give us a resolution that that's going to continue. And I know that, the psychological bodies and so many I guess organisations have been pushing for Medicare funded psychology and allied health to continue post, March something soon.
End of March.
But it hasn't been announced, and so that's really puts a lot of uncertainty onto providers, as well as people who may have engaged allied health professionals from further afield because they have more choice now. I mean, I see people from, interstate or regionally, and they've just been able to pick who they think suits them because of telehealth. And I know that people have done that with medical specialists as well. They might be able to go and get the top, whatever specialist in a different state because it's telehealth. So we'll lose that kind of link and that connection if it's not maintained. So I really do hope.
It's a really good point, Medicare, and even accessing psychiatrists as well, because it's pushed a lot of our community into the next tier of support needs, given the impact on mental health and the government support around access to psychiatric. That's probably a topic for another day, acute mental health co-issues.
I'll talk about it with you, Katie.
We could have another hour. We got another hour.
But because I live by myself, that means that it's much easier for me to take downtime and have sensory breaks when I need it. Whereas I'm sure there's a lot of parents who are identified as neurodivergent, or they are, but they don't realise it yet, where before last year, they got their downtime when their kids were at school. So when everything went to being at home, not only were they having to manage their kids' home learning and stuff, but they weren't getting any downtime whatsoever. So
Penny, this is such a good point.
You laughing in agreement there.
I was, because so many of our adults are saying that just was like a microscope on my life. Like it just exaggerated whatever was going on, and I was able to mask or internalize earlier, but the mask just fell off because the demands were so much more and I had no downtime at home and my anxiety increased. And so that landscape changed for them so much. And that's why I'm laughing, because what you're saying is so spot on about that. Many people will probably relate to that comment.
I think too, it can be challenging when you all have different sensory needs and you're all competing with different transitioning issues. Whereas my mum and I have very similar sensory profiles. So we basically go through a similar thing. If we come home from work or school, we both retreat. Whereas some of my other friends who are maybe need more energy or are more sensory seeking, I would really struggle to live with because it's the opposite to my needs. So I think as a parent, when you're navigating multiple support needs when you've got your own support needs, I can imagine that must be so overwhelming over COVID when other supports are no longer as accessible as they might have been.
Absolutely. We've got that in our household. Competing needs, conflicting needs, and managing that is very difficult. So trying to think of creative ways to support them. We sometimes schedule certain rooms so that they can access it at different times. But I agree, it's a struggle and still trying to learn from that. So if anyone has any ideas in the comments later when we share this, please feel free to share on that. Amanda?
I just wanted to thank you all for bringing this one up and thank you, Penny. I like it. See, there's all this perception that you have to be a parent to empathise. That no, And also demonstrating the awesome empathy that we have, just another misconception. False, chuck it out. I just think, I don't know about with you. I'm just thinking of having like all suddenly work, kids, everybody needs like their own private space, but we're all in the one space. It's like, what? How does that happen? How do you suddenly create a space for school, recharging, therapy? Like that was just, that was
Very
so hard,
yeah,
so hard.
Very
And
hard.
still, like, I think the clash, or I think it's like a, normally we would have time away from each other. And I think that with a lot of neurodivergent people need a lot more downtime, that just doing whatever it is that is recharging and rejuvenating for each person, which is different. Then you stick everybody together and it's like,
well, that's what can go in a lockdown plan.
That's what could go in a lockdown plan.
Finish. Did you have a thought on that?
Just quickly, I think something that I've learned as well, and just putting myself in the shoes of family members, something that I learned that is everyone has their own sort of personal space bubble, and it looks different for everyone. So I have quite a large personal space bubble, and then different animals have bigger personal space bubbles, particularly horses. And when you're stuck in a house over lockdown, I imagine it to be probably something similar to putting two stallions together in a paddock really close to each other, that they have all this energy and they're so close to each other they can't get their own space, and often they start fighting with each other. And it's all that, I think, when you don't have those bubbles or you feel more confined, I think from that perspective that's been something that I've had to work on too, which I've done by going out for walks for my once a day, or having a sensory break, or watching something calming, or delving myself into my intense interests. But that's the analogy I'd use to kind of make sense of what I'm experiencing.
It's a good one.
I love that one. The bubbles. We're like,
I was literally visualizing a bubble.
Our bubbles are overlapping. It's like,
that's so true.
I love it.
I know we're sort of getting towards the end. I could talk all day with you guys. However, I did have a question from our members, and think about it. If you've got something you'd want to add to it, it's going back to school. Is obviously with lockdown now, it has triggered a bit more school refusal, and I can't go to school anymore. And so much of the so-called expert advice on this misses the mark, because it talks about, for example, rewarding the child with an ice cream or an outing at the end of the week. This is the question. And that would take away the distress. So we actually want an autistic-led, trauma-informed perspective on this, so that we can, give some authentic input to members who might be wondering what to do when their child is having school refusal. I know it's a big topic, so even if it's just one thought, we can start that conversation. Amanda?
Oh, okay, me. I knew you were going to get a bit. I think that so school refusal, I hate that word. It's not that. That's different. Like, that's not what happens when you're feeling overwhelmed and your nervous system is like triggered into a threat response, and you're either shut down or you're fighting or you're flighting or you're whatever. That's not choosing not to go to school. That is, I feel unsafe. And it's not unsafe because school is a terrible place. It's not that kind of unsafe. It's like a physical, automatic body reaction. And so I think I always try to look back, way back. It's not like, something happened at school. It's like, firstly, I know a lot of us, all of us, We want to know lots of details about what it's going to be like, what's going to happen, who's going to be there, who's the teacher, what about all the stuff I didn't do? I didn't do that homework because my mum said that I didn't have to because she was unschooling me. That's me. And who am I going to speak to? Is my friend there? What? Maybe they don't like me anymore. Like a million things. And all those things are so, so important. And they're often interpreted by non-autistics as like, we're so anxious. We're so anxious. Like, oh my gosh, they're so anxious. But it's like, actually, it's not. This is actually an accommodation that we do require. It is a legitimate. It's just a necessary accommodation. This is not like about an anxious autistic person. It's just about a general person. And so having somebody who at school who will actually talk with you, with your carer, with your parent, with your psychologist before school starts and actually answer every single question. And what if this and what if that? And, you know, I think that's really important. And having I think just sort of understanding that a lot of what looks like anxiety is actually, it's a physical response. It may not be about something that is happening at school or has happened. It's just it's a physiology kind of difference. And if our nervous system is calmed down, then we'll be able to go. But if your child is in a state of, I feel like I'm about to die, but I can't explain that because nothing's happening. And so everybody's going to just think I'm, attention seeking. That's what they say. And I've got no reason. I just say, I can't go. No, I'm not going. Don't make me. Because there's no explanation. So I think really having support for families to understand the central nervous system and the effect of adrenaline and the effect of what happens when our threat system is activated. It's like none of these things become a choice or an option. And it's sort of very counterproductive to then be forcing a child who's already feeling, not cognitively, their body is feeling like they're going to die. And then you're forcing them into that situation without a plan or support or knowledge that that's what's happening. So I think the misinterpretation, if you need to sort of know that your child is understood, at school, and that you're going to hand your child over to somebody that you feel 100% understands your child and is going to look after them like you do. It's like, then you feel like, I will hand you over and you will be okay. And they will call me if you're not okay. And I will call your psychologist or your doctor if you're not okay. So it's like there is a plan.
Yeah, and I think that's the disconnect when there are, some schools that can do that really well and have that deep empathy and understanding and connection and ability to see what that is in terms of that fight or flight response rather than trying to manipulate a situation just to stay at home. We hear so many people with that disconnection of, where it should be and where it is. So that's a really good point. What we need to work towards.
I think allied health, I think having if that is happening, like if your child is in that state, I think do at least go to the GP, get a referral to an allied health professional who understands, autism or the central nervous system, like an OT or whoever it is, somebody who can advocate for the child and speak to the school to explain that this is something that is being worked through, and the child needs support with. They're not just being, choosing not to go because they want to go and hang out at wherever with their friends. It's not that. It's to me, I think it is a serious thing if you're that activated. So it's sort of getting to the bottom of helping a child get to a point where they're not that way. And maybe they've got legitimate reasons why school is scary. Like maybe there really is stuff that maybe they're not understood, you know, maybe that, you know, accommodated, or maybe they do feel trapped once they're there and there's not like this support plan for what if, okay, so if I go and then I feel like this, then what? So if kids feel that way, they'll often just not go. Whereas if you know that there is a plan, that when they're at school, there's a person, there's a place, there's a plan for if they do need to go home, go to, you know, a quiet spot until parents, you know, can collect them, that'll hopefully reassure the parent and the child that it's okay to kind of push a little bit, encourage a little bit more, but not when a child is in a highly panicked state, but, you know, as a conversation.
That's a really good point and very practical. And I think that will be really useful for many of our members listening. It's a topic we do hear a lot of. So thank you for that. I am conscious of time. So I just think that we covered so much today. And I just wanted to say a huge thank you. I'm sure that when we put this all together and share it with our members, there'll be lots of questions. We will give you the opportunity in the comments to respond to if you happen to be, by the way, when we share it. But really grateful to you all, just from our community to you, each of you. Thank you so much. We're really grateful for your input. So proud that it was all autistic led. You know, this is just creating the change we need to see in our community. So thank you guys for being part of it and for joining Yellow Ladybugs today, and to the Department of Education for supporting us in delivering this. We really are grateful. Thank you, all of you. Good luck. Thanks, Penny. Thanks, Shadia. And thanks, Amanda, so much for joining us today.